Well, hi everybody. That's the object of the show is to provide people with some really good information and help because reality is that we all go through so many ups and downs in our lives. And trust me, my friends, whether or not you are a therapist or whether or not you are a celebrity or rich and poor, we all have issues. And, one of the things that I really hope that I have convinced you over all of these years is the importance of being willing to acknowledge and address and resolve as best as we can the issues that continue to get in the way of our life and our relationships. And I really hope that after all these years that I've also convinced you that we don't need to navigate all of this on our own. And sometimes the very best thing that we can do is reach out and get some really good professional help. And I want to thank all of you so much. I was doing some calculations before this show, and I've been hosting the Ask Beatty show here on the Progressive Radio Network. We're going into the 12th year. So I took out my calculator, and it's almost 600 shows. And every single week, what I say is that I hope that every week that there is some little thing, some little takeaway that will really help improve the quality of your life and your relationship. And for those of you who may be new listeners and you're wondering who is Beatty Compredos and what is she actually talking about? Well, I am a nationally recognized psychotherapist and also a sex therapist. I'm the author of the groundbreaking book, one of the groundbreaking books on relationships, for better, for worse, forever. Discover the path to lasting love. I'm the advice columnist for Dan's papers in the Hamptons and Palm Beach. I've been in national radio and television for many years, but I think of all the things that I do, and I have to say that I love all the different things that I do. Probably what goes on in my private practice with patients here in New York City, actually beautiful, sunny New York City today, and in East Hampton. I think that that's what gives me the greatest sense of satisfaction. People are coming in and they're struggling with issues, depression, anxiety, domestic violence, early child sexual abuse, sexual issues, and for people to have the courage, because I know that it is very difficult for all of us to admit to ourselves that there is an issue, and just thinking about it and hoping about it and dreaming that it is all going to be okay without doing some very serious work. I find that people tend sometimes for years and years to just be on a never-ending roller coaster ride. And in my world, it always seems to take a crisis. I don't think in the over 35 years that I have been practicing here in the United States and also in Canada, I'm Canadian, dual citizenship, lived in New York City now for almost 12 years. Nobody's ever called and said, Beatty, I need some help in communication. I mean, that never, it would be good, but that never, ever happens. Usually there is a crisis. With couples, I would say that over 90% of the couples that I work with have contacted me because of an extramarital affair, as well as domestic abuse of various different kinds. So I think one of the things that I'm hoping to maybe convince you of today, wait until there is a crisis. If you find that you're on a never-ending roller coaster ride and that depression is just lingering way too long, I mean, we do get depressed, but if it's 1 week and 2 weeks and 2 months and 2 years and 10 years, I think it's time to really give yourself permission to get off that ride and to get some really good help. And also in assessing your relationships, I think that we all sometimes we fool ourselves, and yet it's important, which is why I have this weekly check-in for you to check in on your own mental health, and be honest about it, and to also be looking at your relationships, your intimate relationships, your family relationships, your relationships with children, your relationships with colleagues, and hopefully things are working well. But if they're not, of course, the real question then is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Because if we do nothing, what then is our role? Our role then becomes, and of course, I'm not talking about children, it then becomes almost an encouraging and enabling role. And I oftentimes say, and this is going to be interesting to talk about with my guest, I have a fabulous guest that I'm going to be introducing in a couple of minutes, that in most situations, it really does take two to tango. It takes two people who are dancing a dance, which is why it is so important that people are being educated about relationships, what healthy relationships are and healthy relationships are not. And the thing that is so amazing to me, when I talk to other educators around the country and I talk to people in the media, and I don't think that there has ever been so much focus on mental health, domestic violence as there's been in the last number of years. And there's never been so many self-help books and therapists and love coaches and relationship so-called experts, and yet look at the statistics that we're actually talking about. This is real life, my friends. Every day, 3 women are killed in the United States by their boyfriends or husbands or partners. Okay. The dating abuse statistics, and I was talking to a college counselor a couple of hours ago. Who ever dreamed that 25% of high school girls, teenage girls that are in high school in the United States, have been physically or sexually abused by a dating partner? And that number in college is even more disturbing. It is actually 26.4% of female college students experience rape or sexual assault over the course of their college career. And let's look at the divorce rate in this country, okay? For first marriages, and I'll ask people, so what do you think the divorce rate for first marriages is? And I think most people get it right. They say it's around 50%. Well, it's around 46 to 48%. And then I'll ask the question, so what do you think the divorce rate for second marriages is? Well, that number goes up to 67%. Okay, we didn't do well in marriage number 1. We didn't do well in marriage number 2. What about marriage number 3 or marriage number 4? Well, the divorce rate, and you can take a big breath here, the divorce rate for third marriages is between 71 and 73%. So what have we learned? What are we doing in the mental health field? What are we doing in the educational field? And the question, of course, is why is this happening? Why is this happening that we can't get off this negative, never-ending, downward cycle roller coaster ride? I'm going to tell you a little quick story because I really do want to begin to talk to my guest. Yesterday, I get a call from a very well-known New York publicist. And she asked me whether or not I was interested. She didn't want me as a client. She had a speaking gig for me. And she said, I want you to speak to some Ivy League women, graduates and alumni, and I want you to talk to them about dating and relationships. So naturally, I'm a serious person here. So I sent her all my material from my Never Make a Mistake in Love program based on my research, based on my books, which talks about the 3 things that people need to do to never make a mistake in love again. So, of course, the first thing is we need to be in a good place ourselves, emotionally, psychologically. We need to work through as best as we can the issues, the unfinished business, the skeletons in the closet. Number 1, we need to educate ourselves about the ingredients that go into a successful relationship. And then, of course, what I'm kind of known for is my 10-step formula. It's an assessment formula which teaches people how to assess who's right for you and who's wrong for you before you get killed, before you get into these terrible relationships. So she writes me back and she says, this is way too heavy. I thought that you were going to be teaching these Ivy League women about algorithms, about dating algorithms on the dating sites. It's like, wow. Now, the algorithms, of course, are important. I am no algorithm expert. All I know is that the patients that I see, and everybody is on these dating sites, whether they're meeting people in church or synagogue or on the sites, the algorithms are kind of less important than learning how to assess, whether somebody is going to scam you, whether or not you're going to be safe. So here we are in a situation where I think we're wanting to reach the goal. We're wanting to have love. We're wanting to have success and healthy relationships. And yet, the fundamental issues of what we need to learn and what we need to do, these are the things that need to be taught in the schools. I was doing some consultation at East Hampton High School a year ago. And this is what the kids need. This is what we all need. I didn't learn any of this when I was growing up, in my Orthodox Jewish family in Winnipeg, Canada. I didn't know. I mean, I was left to my own devices and let me tell you, made plenty mistakes along the way. But in any case, it is about relationship education. And it was about a month ago, I was going through Dan's papers where I am the advice columnist, and I read about my guest, Dr. Nadine Macaluso. And she is an LMFT. She is a licensed mental family therapist, also a PhD. And I started to read about her book, Run Like Hell, A Therapist's Guide to Recognizing, Escaping, and Healing from Trauma Bonds. And the book actually is about Dr. Macaluso's first husband, Jordan Belfort, who was a man portrayed, and I don't know how many of you saw the movie, I certainly did, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Wolf of Wall Street. And what was so impressive for me, and of course I had to get on the phone and I had to call Dr. Macaluso immediately, was that this just wasn't some patient's story. This was her story. And to be able to have the courage to write about something so personal, so painful, and hopefully to be able in the process to educate and empower women to not to have to go through what she went through. So having said all that, I am so happy to meet you in person, or at least on Zoom. At least we're looking at ourselves, on video. And again, I want to thank you for writing the book. I went through the whole thing, and it is definitely it's a must read for all of us, and also for having the courage to put yourself out there. So again, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. What an introduction. Loved it.
Well, good. We definitely have to meet in person,
Yeah.
within a relatively short period of time. So for people who are not familiar with the movie and are not familiar with the book yet, let's start at the beginning. Let's hear about your story. You're beautiful, you're smart, you're educated. But I have one question, and I promised myself that I needed to ask this question, even though it's probably not the most politically correct way to begin an interview. Did you come from an abusive family?
No, I did not.
You did not. So this was not something that you were repeating.
No, no. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book, right? Is to dispel some of these, you know, dogmas, right? That like, oh, if you end up in a trauma bond or in a domestic violence situation, it's because you have a bad picker or you grew up like that. No, I was raised by a single mother in Brooklyn and who was reading Jung and Freud in the 70s and was very into psychology and feelings. And so, no, I did not. That doesn't mean my childhood was perfect, but it was good enough. It was good enough. It was very.
So how did all of this begin? How old were you when you met and then subsequently married Jordan Belfort?
Yeah, so I met Jordan as the movie depicts. I went to a part, the movie The Wolf of Wall Street depicts. I went to a party at his house in West Hampton with my boyfriend, and I walked into the party, and all these people were acting a little strange. And I was like, I wonder what's happening here.
Right.
Little did I know they were all on Quaaludes, but because I didn't know what
Uh-huh.
that was at the time. And I left the party immediately because, as the movie depicts, somebody did expose themselves to me. And
Wow.
yeah, and I felt totally traumatized at 22 by that. But then I guess he had set his sights on me and decided to get me to meet him on a date. And so he made a woman $15,000 in the stock market to get her to set me up with him, but not like with him, but the three of us just go to dinner. And I had no idea I was being set up. So as a 22-year-old girl, I just showed up, and the rest, as they say, is history.
So you had a boyfriend. You and your
Yes,
boyfriend went to the party. Jordan sees this gorgeous blonde, makes the decision that he'd like to somehow get to know you,
correct.
and then pursued you.
Pursued me, yep. And then we, like I said, we were set up, and then I was modeling at the time, and I went to Chicago. And so I didn't see him for about 6 months, and then we bumped into each other at the Vertical Club, which was a great old gym in New York City, for those that
Right.
know. And yeah, we had our first date after that, and then, typical like a trauma bond, it was fast and furious and intense, and in 6 months later we were engaged, and 6 months later we were married.
So tell me, when you first started to get to know him, of course you were young, and I'm sure you hadn't been taught the ingredients that actually go into a successful relationship, like none of us were probably ever taught. So what was it about him? What was it about the magnetism that he probably
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's an extraordinarily charming, bright individual. And I was 22, he was 28 or
uh-huh.
27 when I met him. And I was from Brooklyn, he was from Queens. So we had that similar thing. And we just really got along fantastically. And he love bombed me, I mean, in the most quintessential way. With, I had an 800 square foot apartment. The next day I had 1,200 square feet of flowers,
Wow.
like the movie shows. And he would just send his driver with a Bulgari watch, and, send me $15,000 in cash. And I was just like, what's happening? And we just really also just really got along and fell in love. So I thought, you know,
What did your mother think about her little girl and this
oh,
new relationship with this guy who was love bombing her with money, with watches, with apartments?
yeah,
What did she think?
she said, can I take you to lunch? And I said, sure. And she sat me down and she looked at me. She said, you don't have to do this. And I said,
Uh-huh.
oh, but Mom, I love him.
Uh-huh. So she was worried.
She was worried for sure.
Did she ever tell you what she saw, what she was worried about at that point?
She said to me, she had a British accent because she was English, and she said, Nadine, somebody can be an absolute genius in one area of their life and just be terribly horrible in the rest of it. And I want you
Uh-huh.
to remember that.
So
And
you're
that,
madly in love. You're a
that,
young kid. He is love bombing you with every conceivable thing that would certainly entice a young woman and also an older woman. So you get engaged. And at this point, like in retrospect, of course, in retrospect, we're all geniuses, right?
yes.
Uh, in retrospect, do you think there were red flags? Do you think there
Oh,
was something that
so
you missed?
there were so many red flags
There
that,
were.
yeah, yeah. You know what, you have to remember, right? 25 years ago, we weren't talking about narcissism and love bombing and red
Right,
flags.
right,
I was
right,
believing
right,
all the Disney movies, right? That
right,
someday
right,
my prince will
right.
come and save me from this horrible world. And I thought that he was it. But he started right away with the threats. If you don't marry me, I'm not going to date you. And I said,
Uh-huh.
I don't want to get married. I'm 23. I'm modeling in the city. I don't want to get married. And then if you don't have children, I'm not going to marry you. So the threats and the domination and the
Uh-huh.
coercion started. And I would fight back because I am an independent woman, but then I would just be like, oh, he's doing this because he loves me so much.
Right. Did you have anybody at all to sort of run this by to get a second opinion on what they thought? Since you were saying they're 21, you're not ready to be married, you can't commit to having children at any sort of given time. Was there anybody that was close to you that you could talk to about this?
Well, not really, not right when I first met him. No, really, because all my friends were young and we were idiots. And, what did we know at that point?
Right.
And, I got myself into therapy about a year into meeting him because I knew
Uh-huh.
it was way too much for me to manage. I was
Right.
like, this is way beyond my pay grade here. And then I was already in it at that point, right? So.
So what did your therapist have to say about all of this?
Well, that's the interesting part because I use a lot more psychoeducation with my patients today, as I'm sure you do, right?
Yeah.
I think it was a lot more Freudian. I went in there and talked, and I'm very grateful for it because I really believed it's what kept me sane and allowed me to manage that time, even though
Mm.
she told me to run like hell. But even if she
She
would have,
did. She told you to
no,
run
she never
like
did. No, she never did. I said she
uh-huh.
probably should have, but you know what?
Yeah,
Probably if she would have, I probably would have never gone back,
right.
because I wouldn't have listened to her. I know that now.
Mm.
So I went every week at Monday at 1 p.m. to that therapy office,
Yeah.
like Pavlov's dog.
Yes. Yes. And your takeaway from the therapy was basically psychoanalytic
Yeah, very psychoanalytic. And I do think that she helped me connect back to myself and was a very safe space for me to go and say all these crazy things that I was enduring without judgment. And I think that alone was very beneficial for me, hence why I decided to become a therapist, because I do believe that it did save me. I
you
do believe
believe
that.
that the therapy saved you even
Yes,
though you were going, what's
yes.
the expression from the from from one maybe safe or seemingly safe place into an extremely dangerous place.
Extremely dangerous. And that's the thing. And I offer this to the listeners is that, I had no idea that a person could even be like this
Uh-huh.
because I didn't grow up with yelling. My mother was not malicious. My father was not malicious. He was a bit of a Disneyland dad, but nobody was mean to me. I'd never seen this level of just domination and intimidation and
Right.
threats. And I was just like, what the hell is happening? But
Right.
as we know, that mixed with love, right?
Yes.
That cognitive dissonance creates
Yes.
intense confusion inside of us. And I
Yes.
just walked around utterly confused all the time.
Yes, I think that it is a shame. Of course, this is my, kind of telling it that like it is, position. And I'm not a fan of American mental health, and I'm very outspoken about this. I think
Yeah.
much to the chagrin of many people in our professional world. But I feel, and just given what you're saying, that the therapist had a real responsibility, Freudian or not, to say, hey,
Yes.
you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
my safety was at risk. That's
Yes.
the thing, right? We know that as therapists, that's our number one job, right?
Absolutely.
To keep.
Yes, and the whole do no harm thing. And in fact, again, no judgment, no blame, but I mean, she really enabled the harm that ended up happening to you.
Yes,
I
for
mean,
sure.
she did. She did. Did you ever get back to her and have this conversation with her or not?
No, I didn't. I didn't. I
Yeah.
moved on and moved to California and restarted my life. But yeah, no, it was a crazy 7 to 8 years, and I'm very lucky and a knock on wood that I'm here.
Absolutely. So you got married. Did you have a big wedding, a lavish wedding with a lot of people and great
We
food?
we we did, and the wedding was at the Maliahana in Anguilla. We had like over 200 people there,
Wow.
and I was miserable because he had forced me into this pregnancy and then decided to be wasted the whole weekend, and I
Uh-huh.
was
Wow.
furious,
I would
right?
think.
So I was like, wait, you wanted to get married, you wanted to have kids, and now you're not even present with me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right. So that was the night before wedding. I did a video about it on Instagram. It was not fun because I was, of course, furious, but I went through with it. I had a miscarriage. Um, and that's okay because I have two beautiful children today. But yeah, it was just after 6 months and then a year, that's it. just kept getting devolving is the right word, devolving into madness.
Was there, because I haven't, you know, gotten into all the details, was there physical, sexual abuse as well?
Not only at the end, there was
Oh,
physical abuse. And it's where he kicked me down the stairs in my solar plexus. And but the emotional and the verbal abuse to me, honestly, and I deal with this with my patients all day long, is not that it's almost worse, but it's really hard to deal with because there's no scars. You know,
exactly.
the women I work with say, I wish he hit me. And I have to
Right,
say that
right.
when he did kick me down the stairs, that was a very defining moment, right? I could
Mhm,
never really love him again after that. But
mhm,
there was a lot of gaslighting and
mhm.
psychological abuse.
Were you, when you go back and you think about this, retrospectively, after you got married, and of course you talk about what happened, he was wasted, here you were
Yeah.
pregnant. Were you starting to wonder, oh, something is really wrong
Oh, yeah.
here?
Yeah, yeah, and I totally would be something's not right here, but then what would happen, right? I'd look down my driveway and there would be a horse that he bought me,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes.
Right, so there's always that intermittent reinforcement that we
Right.
know is the bond now and the
Absolutely,
trauma bond.
absolutely.
And it's a very strong bond. And when I did my research, when I read that animal trainers that use intermittent reinforcement, their animals bond to them 230% more than
Uh-huh.
trainers that just use straight kindness.
Great. So interesting.
And I was like, that's it.
That,
Okay.
right.
That combined with the cognitive dissonance and the fact that hope was the hook. I was like, oh, if we could just get back to those early days. I know it's in there. But of course,
Yes.
I was clueless and didn't know my heart didn't know what to feel.
Yeah. So as you were going through this extraordinarily difficult period, that you were becoming even more aware how extraordinarily difficult it was, did you talk to anybody? Did your mom know? Did
Yes.
anybody? They did.
Yes, I'm a pretty open book in general because I grew up like that, just sharing and processing and sharing and processing. So yeah, people knew and my parents knew, but you also have to remember, Beatty, there was so much money, right? So then he was
Yes.
like King Midas, and
Yes.
there's so much power with that, and everybody overlooks the psychological abuse
Yes.
because of all the money that's intertwined with it.
Uh-huh. Do you think that that was, again, no blame, no judgment, but do you think that that was a part of maybe your parents' hope that
Yes,
it was, she's with a rich guy, she'll never
sure.
have to worry about money.
Yep, yep.
Hopefully it'll get better.
That for sure. My mother, not so much, but my father for sure. And again, they're not living in it, right? Everybody else's lives go on. And then
Right,
you go and then I have a child, right? And then I have another child. And so our lives are getting more and more intertwined. And then all of a sudden you're like, what the hell am I in?
right, right. Now the marriage lasted for, it was 7 years,
7 to 8 years, yeah.
seven
Hmm.
to eight years.
Yeah.
And what was he like with your children?
This is interesting. My children were 3 and 5 when I left, so
Yes,
they were very young, and they have a wonderful relationship with him today.
they do.
They do. He's a very good father. Well, I also made a very intentional effort to support that relationship as long as he was kind and good to them, and he is. And so he wasn't really involved that much with the children when they were babies. It was me and I had help. And, he would like show up and play with them on the floor for a little bit, but he wasn't that involved with them. He was there and but he was working and doing what he was doing. And also I would shield them a lot from him too, because when he would be on drugs.
Yes, yes. What was he cheating on you as well with other women?
That's the interesting part. In the movie, that's like just shown so much. And I guess he was. based on
Uh-huh.
the movie in the book. But that was never what our fights were about. Our fights were always about the drugs. But it's interesting through his narrative, that's what he made the fights about. No, but they were really about the drugs.
So it sounds like it was quite the life. I mean, were there ever any times that things appeared to be going in a better direction or not really?
Well, yeah, I think similar to most of these relationships, there are moments where the pathological partner will be like, I'm sorry, this will never happen again. I'm going to go to therapy. Let's go to therapy.
Right,
I'm not going to
right.
do drugs for a while, right? So there were moments like that where, again, hope is the hook, but it wasn't sustainable because his drug addiction got progressively worse.
And he was not interested. I mean, did he even recognize that there was a problem, that he had a substance abuse problem? And was he at all interested in maybe doing something about it or not really?
He wasn't interested in doing something about it till I threatened him and told him I was leaving him and I wasn't going to sit there and watch him die. And he had to go to rehab, and that was when he got violent. And I really set the boundary and said, I'm leaving you. That's it. I'm done. And that was when he got violent and said he was taking my daughter to Florida. And I said, yeah, okay. Like, I am from Brooklyn, right? You're
Right.
not taking my daughter to Florida. And that's when he got violent. And then he did go to rehab. So
Uh-huh.
there was a silver lining in that. But then when he came back, I was like, I stayed with him because he said he was getting sober for us. But then a year later, he got arrested. And I said, this is my window. The power balance now shifted, right?
Right.
He didn't hold
Right.
all the power anymore. And I had my window to leave.
Did you have support at that time to
Yes.
the chutzpah, the courage to get
I had
out?
courage. Yeah. I was so done at that point. And I mean, nothing could have made me stay. And I knew that he couldn't harm me anymore because he had an ankle bracelet on and he was the government's problem now.
Right.
So I had my parents, I actually checked myself into the Karen Foundation for a week. I went to a program they have there called Breakthrough.
Uh-huh.
That was really life-changing. And then I started on my new life at 31 years old.
And how did you explain to the children what was going on? I mean, they must, I mean, kids, they're so smart.
They're
They
so,
must have had a sense that all was not well with mom and dad.
oh, and I was very honest with them. And I said, your dad was a drug addict and abusive, and I left him. I
Mhm.
never disparaged him. And none of this conversation is to disparage him. It's just very factual for me at this point, especially I'm not emotional. It's so many years later.
Right.
And luckily I was, because guess what? Then he wrote a book and made a movie. So they weren't shocked.
Yes.
They're like,
Yes.
that's my dad.
Yes. And it's so wonderful to hear that he now is
Yeah.
a good father. Is he remarried? Is he in
He's
a real
remarried. Yes. He's remarried to a lovely young woman. My children like her.
uh-huh.
And yeah, he met a very nice lady.
And has he changed his life and is are the drugs no longer an issue?
Yeah. Not that I know of. Again, I don't interact with him, but not that I know of. And he seems to have really rebuilt his life in his own way.
Did he ever apologize to you for what he put you through?
Not really, no.
No. So you say that there's really no relationship other than the fact that you share your beautiful children.
Yeah, when he got arrested and then I moved to Los Angeles, he did move to Los Angeles to be closer to his children. We always had a very decent relationship for the
Mhm,
children, in spite of everything that had happened between us.
mhm.
It was just a conscious choice that I made because I was thriving and living my best life. And, listen, I always say divine ordinance, that's the father of my children. So I
Right,
have an obligation within reason, of course, to make it
right,
work.
right, right. And his family, I'm very curious about his family. Did they know what was going on? Did he come from a family where there was alcoholism or substance abuse of various different kinds or violence?
No, his father who's deceased, his parents, I got along very well with them. His mom is still alive. His dad had suffered from abuse, and then his dad was verbally abusive.
Uh-huh.
So it's a learned behavior and then all the other psychological mechanisms that were happening inside of him.
Right. So how did you when you got the courage to and I love some of the chapter headings and the subchapter headings, getting on the merry-go-round of insanity. How did you do this? Because I know a lot of people listening, it's like, oh my God, how do I get out of this? What do I do? What's the first step?
Yeah, the first step for me was having the courage. Well, first of all, I had to have radical acceptance that I was in an extraordinarily dysfunctional, toxic relationship that was never getting better.
Right.
Right.
And you did. You had radical
I had
acceptance.
radical acceptance
Yeah.
around that. And then I said, okay, now that I have that, what do I do? I needed to keep myself in therapy. And like I went to the Karen Foundation, really learning about myself because you're so obsessed with the other person.
Right.
And you have to turn the mirror back on yourself and start to learn about yourself because you lose yourself.
Right.
And luckily, I had had a little business that I had started. So I had something to ground myself in, and I just got really into my own self-care. And honestly, that was it. I wish there was like some magical thing that I could tell people, but I just also had to have the courage to face my fear of being lonely and I'm being afraid of the unknown and tolerating that ambiguity.
Right.
Um, but anything was better than what I was in.
Right.
Right. Because it was so hell, it was such hell.
Yeah. And I would assume, although I should never assume anything, that money was not a problem for you.
Well, no, it was. It
It
was.
was.
Yeah, it was. Because I never took, I didn't take any money.
You
And
didn't take any money.
no, because it was all blood money. The government would have come after me and I gave back the government $1 million worth of jewelry and never looked
I
back.
see. So how did you support yourself and the kids?
So I had like a little money, like maybe $100,000, and
Right.
I had a business where I made maternity clothing and had a store and a website and a catalog. And
Uh-huh.
And then I started to make maternity clothing for Walmart and Target for the big guys.
I see.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then I was able to support myself. And then I moved in with my current husband of 25 years now. So I was supporting my kids and he was, supporting the house, let's say. And then at 39, I was meditating and I was like, I'm going to go back to school to be a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that this one. I mean, I love all the headings, but this one I really love, the wisdom of the wound. And of course, I call it lessons to be learned.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So
Yes.
between the time that you left your marriage and then meeting your husband, your current husband, who you've been with for and married for 25 years, what was that time frame like? And what kind of work did you actually do, emotional, psychological work, to ensure that you were not going to repeat history?
Yeah, and that's where the Karen Foundation really came in, where I learned that I could actually say no and I could have boundaries. At 31, I was like, what's a boundary? What do you mean I
Right,
can say no? I had no idea, right?
yeah,
Because again, this was 25 years ago.
right.
Weren't really talking about that. So I learned there a lot about healthy relationships and communication. And I learned about my attachment pattern. And I just learned about a lot of stuff. And I learned that it's not so much about me trusting the other person, it's about me trusting myself,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
And relying on my gut and
Yeah.
my instinct to make a good choice.
Right. So I'm sure people are very curious. So where did you meet this husband at
I
25
met
years?
him on a blind date.
Uh-huh.
And I was having fun dating all these men in Manhattan and running around. And I met him on a blind date and we just got along. He had 3 little children. I had 2. He was in the garment business like me. So again,
Uh-huh.
we had that similarity. And I'll never forget, we had our first argument and he said to me, "Oh yeah, I get that. I understand." And I was
Yes.
like, "What?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yes.
you hear me?"
Right. Right.
Because I now I know somebody has to hear you to love you.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, when I give presentations, I'll ask an audience, so what do you think are the two most important ingredients that make or break relationships? So people will say money, they'll say, all kinds of things. And of course, the most unsexy but true answer, as you're saying, is emotional communication and problem solving, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's it. I mean, there's a lot more, but I mean, if you can't solve a problem and have someone say, I get you, I hear you, I'm sorry.
yeah. You can't be in a relationship. And there was another really important thing too. He gave me the space to be who I am.
Mhm.
When you're in when you're dealing with domestic violence or trauma bonds, there's so much coercion, so much pressuring for you
Right,
to behave like the partner wants you to be.
right,
And and that's why I think I've been able to grow and flourish with this career because he's like, you do you.
right. Right, right. I mean, it sounds wonderful. I mean, in the transformation within yourself and what you've learned about yourself to be able to move forward and break the pattern and find someone and have a healthy and loving relationship. I mean, as I was citing the statistics, people aren't doing that though.
No, I
They
know.
are not. They are not, I tell the story that when my first book came out, the publicist and the publisher, this was going to be a New York Times best-selling book, the assessment, how to assess, the 10-step formula. It was not. I mean, the book is done okay, and what I still find is that people absolutely do not want to go through this process, which is why we see a divorce rate for third marriages as being 71, 72%.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's amazing to me how, the statistics that I cite every single week on this show. I mean, these are very depressing statistics.
Yeah. No, they're very real. Yeah.
And there isn't a positive movement. I don't know if you're finding with your patients, whether, of course, people who come to us, they're paying money, they're spending time. I mean, hopefully they're
Yeah.
serious. I mean, are your patients serious about learning the ABCs of what you need to learn to do to have a successful relationship?
I think like you said it. So I love what you said in the beginning. I always say the same thing. Nobody comes to therapy like, "Hey, Dr. Nay, how you doing today?" Right?
Right,
Everybody comes on their knees in crisis. And I think when you come on your knees, you are more open to change. And I think it's ridiculous. We spend so much time teaching children about reading, writing, arithmetic. What about relationships? They are the structure of our whole entire lives,
right,
and we're not taught anything.
right.
So I agree with you. I think it's disgraceful. And I think that's why we are in business, really, just to teach people how to be relational, how to have relationships, even relationship with themselves.
Exactly, exactly. And here's where the schools have such an important role. I mean, I'm did all of my training at McGill, and I started off as a school social worker and then was one of the directors of the Montreal School Social Services program, where relationship education, our programs began in first grade and
Mm.
all the way through. So these days, because I am so committed to trying to change the trajectory of these horrible statistics,
Yeah.
I'm calling a number of schools in the East Hampton High School. They were, very much receptive to this. But I would say that I've called, oh, maybe 20 schools, public schools, private schools. And what's amazing to me is that they don't get it. And it's not a question of money. It's not a question
They don't think they're important. They
they
don't think they're
don't,
important.
yes, these educators who are educating our children don't believe that this is important. I don't know what kind of a world that they're living in. When we're talking about, teenage dating abuse in high school,
That's terrible.
and yet,
I know, and we're social beings. We're built for connection. I mean, literally, a baby's brain cannot develop unless another face is in front of it. I mean, it
exactly.
shows us that we need each other. But yeah, we're really failing in that area. I agree. And the women that I deal with, mostly women, I mean, the things that they are facing in these relationships, and they're in my book,
Right,
because
right.
stories are real, even though, of course, everything's changed. They're relational atrocities.
Yes,
I mean, that's the only word I
yes.
can use for it, and that's why I'm determined. I'm on a mission to educate them and validate them and empower them, because nobody should be treated abusively in the name of love. It's horrific.
Exactly. I mean, and I'm so, I'm so proud of you, and I'm proud of our efforts to try to get this information. And I keep saying to my husband, Jim, who's a criminologist and sociologist, why is this so difficult here? In Canada, in Montreal, so many years ago, people were open, the schools were open, the administration was open to serious relationship education.
Yeah,
And I don't understand. I don't understand, how could we could be talking about mental health, and we've never talked so much about mental health, and
and yet,
yet
yeah,
we're not prepared to do what needs to be done, to have somebody like you in the schools, and me going around to all the schools everywhere in this country. And then there's
yeah.
many more people like us.
That's right. There's so many resources out there that are on.
Yes,
Yeah. And that's why I think you're really seeing it really take off on social media, because there is a hunger for it. I can
yes,
feel the hunger in all my direct messages from all the women, right? Or in all
right,
my posts on TikTok. You know,
right.
there is a hunger for it. People want the information, at least some people, at least
Right.
some.
And well, they want the information, but we have to acknowledge the information is out there.
Yeah,
It's there. I mean, how many more self-help books are we
right.
going to
There's
have
so
out
many.
there? It
Yeah.
just goes on and on. And I think that many aren't as good as they could be. Some are better, some are worse. But what I found, what was really upsetting for me, is that when I lived in Florida, I lived in Sarasota, Florida for a number of years. And one day I get a call from Governor Jeb Bush. And I was with ABC TV, I was on the news, his daughter was having problems. So he appoints me to the Florida State Commission on Marriage. So for 2 years, I was Commissioner Beatty, and I went around speaking with every single decision maker, educational, social work, psychology, you name it, I met the person in the state of Florida for 2 years. And I guess I was naive, because it was my first sort of political kind of, endeavor. Nobody, nobody except the guidance counselors in the schools cared at all about what we're talking about, including Governor Bush. And I'm not sure what this, commission was about. We met, every month or so for 2 years. But it was amazing to me to be sitting with, the heads of state of the Department of Education, people who had the resources, they had the decision-making power to
Yeah.
say, yes, let's teach these kids something really substantial. And when you have a group of educators and people in these positions who don't care,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? We continue our mission, on our
Yeah.
own. But I thought it was a fascinating process.
Yeah. Yeah. It
See
just,
that
it's very
something could have happened. Something positive could have
yeah.
happened.
Right. And that's, why I feel, as much as went through what I went through, I feel so grateful that, I get to use this vehicle, right?
Right.
Of the Wolf of Wall Street, right? That did 500 million worldwide. It's Martin Scorsese's high
Nice.
film, to use it as education. I get to now exploit the movie for what I want it to
Ex-
exploit it for. I couldn't have written it better if I tried.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. How did this movie actually, we've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm very curious, how did it all come about?
Well, my ex wrote a book first, The Wolf of Wall Street, and
Right.
then he got it turned into a movie. And I don't know, he's just has a lot of agency,
Yeah.
and he made it happen. And he got Martin and he got Leo. And then, it was Margot Robbie's first breakout role.
Right.
And I got to meet her because they wanted my ridiculous accent, and she was 22, the age I was, and just
Uh-huh.
lovely and wonderful. And you know, they made it. That was it.
Yes. Yes, and hopefully the takeaway, from audiences was, wow, I need to look at my own relationship. I need to do some work with myself. I need to avoid these kinds of disasters and, learn about what a healthy relationship is and is not.
Yes, hopefully. Or I do put some funny TikToks that if you meet a guy and he says his favorite movie is The Wolf of Wall Street, it's a red flag.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting how, we continue, and of course I will continue forevermore, and I'm sure you will, to try and really educate people about this subject matter.
Yes,
So,
yes. Yes, it's my life's mission. Yeah. I never really wanted a specialty when I came out of school, and I just kind of surrendered and it all came to be. But now that I've landed here, it really feels like a good match with my soul. So I feel
well,
excited.
well, and you're not just talking theory. I mean, you lived it, you
Yes.
processed it, you've learned from it, and now you're out there teaching people, what they need to do and not do to avoid the kind
Yes.
of situation that you found
Yes.
yourself in as a 21-year-old kid.
Yes, because it was not much fun, but I got two beautiful kids from it. My daughter's
Right.
31 and she's a therapist.
She
Um,
is.
she is.
Ah, interesting.
Yep. Yep. And
Interesting.
my son's a musician and they're doing great. So
That's wonderful.
yeah, it's
Oh,
nice.
that's wonderful to hear. Well, listen, what a pleasure. I can't believe it. It's 3:55. I mean, what a pleasure meeting you and talking with you. And if you're in Manhattan, I would love to get together. Where are you right now, by the way?
I'm in Boca Raton right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
planning to go there in January. So are
Oh,
you?
please let me know. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
at Boca West. Yes.
definitely. Now, this show is going to be on the Progressive Radio Network archives with all of your contact information so that people will be able to contact you. Feel free to use the show in whatever ways you want. And
Okay.
let's definitely keep in touch. And again,
Oh,
it
I
was
would
a
love
pleasure
that.
meeting you. And congratulations on your journey, your voyage, your training.
Thank you.
And
Lovely to
very,
meet you.
very impressive. Very
Oh,
impressive.
thank you for having me on. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too. Well,
Take
everybody, it is 3:55, and I think that this has been a very illuminating show with Dr. Nadine Macaluso, and you're going to be able to get all of her contact information on the archives. And I want to leave you with my two weekly messages. The first, of course, which is very apropos what we've been talking about today, is that we all need to do everything possible, including reading and getting therapy and finding good therapists, which is not always easy to do, so that we're able to live our lives in ways that are really in our best interest. And if you're struggling, please take this as a takeaway present to you that we don't need to navigate life's ups and downs on our own. We all need support. We all need community. We all need family. And if you don't have that, at least find a group, find an organization, find somebody, find something that will be able to help you get off a never-ending roller coaster ride that is keeping you, and using Dr. Macalusi's term, in a sort of trauma bond type of relationship. You may be in a trauma bond relationship with yourself, and you also may be in a trauma bond relationship with others. So, and of course, the other second thing, which around the world we really do need to take in, is that we need to be doing a much better job in learning to accept each other. We don't have to agree, we don't have to love each other, but at least try to find ways to get along and stop the wars and stop the hate. And of course, you know, maybe it's naive coming from somebody like me, but I believe that there have to be better ways that we can negotiate differences, that we can talk, that we can compromise, that we can trade off, not perfectly, not ever exactly 100%, where we can begin to come up more with win-win resolutions. And I believe that it's possible. I think we need to do a much better job in our own personal relationships. And I think that politically, I think that's really a given. So after 12 years, again, I want to thank you all so much for, you know, for tuning in. And I really do hope that there is some little thing, like from today's show, from the other 600 shows that I've done, that you will be able to take away that will make a positive difference in your life. So it's beautiful. If you've been sitting around your house or apartment working, or just, you know, trying to get through the day, get yourself out. Exercise is a wonderful way. Get yourself into nature to definitely start to feel better about yourself, and to feel better about life, and to feel better about relationships. So again, have a really good rest of the day, and I will talk with you next week and every Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on the Ask Beatty Show on the Progressive Radio Network. So take care, everybody. Be good to yourself, be good to others. Bye-bye.